ancient magic awakens in the modern age, and an epic adventure is about to unfold. Rochelle, a girl with the power to change the world, will lead us through uncharted territories. 14. Claire, Rochelle, it's late. You can't just go waking people up in the middle of the night. Do you even know what room she's in? Jackson had some good points. I just didn't want to listen. I was already on the stairs leading to the library's main level, prepared to go bang on every dorm room door until Claire answered one of them. No, but I bet you do. I bet you know the room number of every girl who follows you around. Guys like you always do. Guys like me. Jackson scrunched up his face in confusion. I thought his nose was cute when it got all wrinkly like that. What does that even mean? I don't know. Shrugging, I tried to explain. I watch a lot of movies. You just seem like you're that guy. The one who plays with people's emotions. The hot guy who knows he's gorgeous, but likes to be told so anyway. I shifted, uncomfortable under his gaze. I tried not to let it bother me when he pursed his lips to keep from laughing out loud. I don't have a lot of friends. Jackson grinned. You think I'm gorgeous? I compared him to a basic high school heartthrob character trope, and that's what he heard. Ignoring his question, I reminded him, you said you'd help me. I am helping. You would never have found that lead if I wasn't here. You've been here researching for 3 days, and in 3 hours I made more progress than you. I hated to admit he was right. Especially when he looked so smug about it. So then let's go wake her up and ask her about her family, I insisted. The conversation had come full circle, and I wasn't any closer to getting real answers. We didn't have time for circular arguments. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself that even though it might feel like Jackson was enjoying himself, might even seem like he was flirting with me, he still thought I was unstable. And he was right. The sooner I get answers, the sooner I can get out of here. I'm sick of you telling me how dangerous you think I am. The smile fell from Jackson's face. He did not get a chance to retort that he didn't think I was dangerous, he knew it, because the janitor entered the library at that moment. He backed in through the double door, using his hip to open one of them so he could pull his cart into the room. One glance into the library and he spotted me, halfway down the stairs, and Jackson, up on the landing. I guess it was later than I realized. You're here again, he said gruffly. He didn't seem surprised to find me there for the 3rd night in a row, though the fact that I wasn't alone might have shocked him. He looked from me to Jackson and back. Everything okay between you two? We're good, Marty. Rochelle wants to go wake our friend up to ask her a question. Jackson looked pointedly at me. He knew the janitor's name. And I think it can wait for tomorrow morning. Marty huffed, pushing his cart over to the nearest trash can. There wasn't much in it, but he emptied it anyway, saying, I don't much care what you do as long as you get out of here. You know you're not supposed to be here this late, Missy. Call me Rochelle, Marty. I smiled at him, noticing the name tag that was sewn onto his blue uniform shirt. It was the first time I'd actually looked. I was too far away to read it, but now I knew what it said. Same time tomorrow. He huffed again, though I thought I heard amusement in the expression. If you insist. He didn't sound disappointed. Heading back up the stairs, I brushed by Jackson to go gather my notes and replace the library books. While I could have checked them out, I didn't want it on record what I was searching for in case anybody decided to snoop. A thud sounded on the first floor, Marty emptying another trash can into his cart. You know, he called out, I've been here 4 years, and I've seen you in the library more than any other student. It wasn't a question, so I didn't feel the need to answer. Marty made a statement to which I had no reply. Jackson didn't have that problem. That's because she's not a real student. Jackson handed me a pen that had rolled out of my reach, and smiling, told Marty my secret. She's just here to learn about teleportation. There was no stopping my jaw from hitting the floor this time. I froze with my hands halfway to accepting the pen in Jackson's hand. Marty seemed to consider it for a moment. I heard the sound of a squeaky table shifting as he wiped down the surface. This library is a pretty good one, as far as Magischolas go, but you might want to talk to Mr. Phillips or Ms. Williams if you're looking for something that specific. Both of them have extensive personal collections. Where did Ms. Williams keep her books? They certainly weren't on display in her Stark office, I would have noticed. Not that she would loan me one, but I didn't have to be the one who asked. Maybe Jackson would prove to be helpful after all. I finished reshelving the books, making a mental note of which ones I still needed to read tomorrow. Jackson, to his credit, did not spill any more of my secrets. As we left, I turned to wave at Marty. He continued to wipe down tables, but grunted a goodbye without looking up. Jackson said goodnight and left for the opposite side of the dorm building where the boys lived. Thankfully, my dorm was still locked when I got there. That comfort, my lack of sleep, and the lead Jackson had discovered, were enough to have me asleep in minutes. No amount of caffeine could combat that combination. For the first time since applying to Beatrice Potts Magischola a year ago, I felt like everything was going to work out. 15. Knowles 101. I could not believe the words coming out of Mrs. Diana's mouth. I also couldn't refute them without drawing additional unwanted attention or giving myself away. It is widely known that human women will not be able to carry a child fathered by a mage. This discovery was first documented by Meridian Research and Development Laboratories 50 years after the Magical Revolution. Our teacher continued to lie to the class. I tuned her out. This was the same discourse they approved for public school kids, human kids. Most mage children went to magischolas to keep mags and non-mags apart. It was the same rhetoric used to stop interracial marriages for a long time. How did I know it was a lie? My parents made it their mission to learn everything they could about Knowles. If there was a reason, they'd find it. If there was a cure, they'd find it. My dad contracted to Meridian for years before he disappeared. On my first day of public school, they told me I had to let the teachers teach, and not to correct them even if they said something wrong. Especially if they said something wrong about Knowles. We didn't need the attention. Whatever school I attended gave the same speech: if you're human, you can have no future with a mage. Apparently, magischolas taught the same narrative. In fact, Meridian and Amp Winking and Laughing Smiley, and their sister company, Omega Group Labs, theorize that pairings of mags with humans are what results in the birth of a null. I bit my tongue to keep from shouting. Science had no way of predicting if a person was going to be a null until after they were born. There was no pattern, no discernible reason why it happened. It just did. And that scared them enough that they sold their null babies to the labs or abandoned them. The iron taste of blood coated my mouth. Still, I kept my mouth shut. Thankfully, I had an ally in the class. Emily raised her hand, but did not wait for our teacher to acknowledge her. That's not strictly true though, Mrs. Diana. There is little evidence to suggest that nulls are the progeny of one magical and one non-magical parent. I could have kissed my friend. Relaxing my jaw, I pursed my lips together to keep from obviously smiling. Mrs. Diana's eyes narrowed in Emily's direction. The corners of her mouth turned down ever so slightly, but otherwise, she did not react. Her tone was unchanged when she made an attempt to correct Emily. I'm not sure where you found your research, Ms. Newsom, but the data included in your textbook was released earlier this year, and smarter mags than you or I verified that information for accuracy before adding it to our curriculum. No further argument came. Mrs. Diana continued her biased, inaccurate lesson. Most of the time, A null is sent to a special school so that they can learn to control their special brand of magic in a safe place. They were not. Nulls were used for experimentation and exploitation, and there was nothing safe about it. But left to their own devices, a null can become quite destructive to themselves and others. Who knows what makes a person classify as a null? A student on the far side of the room eagerly raised his hand. Nulls don't have magic of their own, he said, pride evident in his voice. Mrs. Diana nodded, scanning the room with her eyes. And what else? A familiar voice answered next. Void mags steal the magic from other mags. I cringed when Jackson used that slur again. Several people around me turned to look back at him. I refused to give him the satisfaction. Heat rose to my cheeks at the words void mage. That did not define me. For an instant, I wanted to prove him right to steal his magic and show him what it meant to be powerless, but the Magischola had wards to prevent that sort of thing. So I faced forward and pretended he wasn't there. I wiped the memories of his kindness from my brain. Goodbye to the memory of Jackson bringing me coffee. Goodbye recollection of Jackson's arms around me while I cried. Take the memory of his full, easy laughter with you when you go. That's not appropriate language, Jackson, though you are correct. Because a null does not have any magic of its own, it tends to take the magic from others. This is only part of what makes them so dangerous. I stopped listening, using everything in my entire being to keep from walking out of the classroom. At least all the public schools I had attended in the last 5 years hadn't been racist. Tears threatened to spill down my face. Reminding myself why I was there helped. A Magischola was the place most likely to have any knowledge on how and why my dad disappeared. Public libraries didn't have books on magic, and the internet was severely lacking. Mags wanted to keep humans and worse, nulls in the dark. The rest of the lesson droned. I didn't hear a word of it. Emily walked with me to Ethics of the Arcane, just a few classrooms down from Mrs. Diana's room. I wish Jackson didn't feel the need to act that way in front of the popular kids, Emily sighed. He's just an asshole. I clutched the strap of my bag tightly, a poor substitution for Jackson's throat. How did I let him make me forget what a jerk he is? Again? Emily looked over at me, shocked at the anger in my voice. It's just a front, you know. He thinks acting that way will make sure he has all the right people in his corner. And by right people I mean the kids of families that Jackson's dad says are the right people. You don't have to defend him just because you have a crush on him, I hissed cruelly. She didn't deserve it. I didn't have to be a jerk just because I was angry with him. I relinquished my hold on my bag to place my hand on her arm, stopping her in the entry to the class. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. Emily wouldn't meet my eyes. That was uncalled for. I didn't mean it. She pulled away from me gently with a shrug. He's a jerk, it's fine. We both knew it wasn't fine. Plus in our last class, Mr. Phillips had given us a case study of a mage who, in trying to give the gift of magic to the magicless, had invited several willing people into his home for illegal magical experimentation. The class was divided for debate, half in favor of this mage and half against. I was on the opposition side with Emily, while Jackson and his friends were on the defending side. Miley sat as close to Jackson as possible without being in his lap. She leaned on him, her left hand draped over his right shoulder in a casual show of possession. I could feel her eyes on me, though I refused to look in their direction. She could have him. Richard, my minor-scale beast commander partner, stood to make his argument in favor of the mage. A student whose name I did not know counted on our side. Miley uncrossed her long legs to stand and make a new point, but she kept her hand on Jackson. The case makes it clear that all of the humans involved were willing and that they were paid well for their time. If they died during the experiment, their families were paid double what was agreed upon if they lived. Because Stanton Miller's goal was to further the human race by making magic available to everyone, his actions cannot be considered unethical. Miley smirked, proud of herself, and took her seat to resume cuddling with Jackson. I wanted to barf. I had several points prepared, but did not see an opportunity to add my voice to the others on my team. Mr. Phillips was grading on participation, but I wasn't worried about passing his class. Emily did not wait for me at the end of class, so we could walk to Rune Law together. I knew that was my fault. I just had to figure out how to make it up to her. So focused on how to apologize to Emily, I didn't realize Claire had come up beside me. You? Come with me, she demanded in a whisper. Without giving me much of a choice, Claire pulled me into the nearest empty classroom. Closing the door behind us, Claire pushed me further into the room. Then she hid behind the door, as she peeked through the opaque window next to it, presumably to make sure we weren't seen or followed. Satisfied, she came further into the dim room. Turning on the lights might draw attention, which is probably why she left us in the dark. First of all, Jackson is dating my best friend, and you better stay away from him if you know what's good for you. Claire crossed her arms over her chest. In the dark, I couldn't see her expression, but I figured that I was supposed to be intimidated. She didn't need to know that it wasn't working. When I stayed quiet, Claire continued. I don't want anything to do with whatever you're researching. There are a lot of Montgomerys out there. My family doesn't have the power to teleport. Was that fear in her voice? When Jackson asks, I told you the same thing I told him. Stop asking questions and leave me the hell alone. Peeking through the window again, Claire deemed it safe to slip out of the classroom. She did not look back. 16. Chadwick Montgomery. Naturally, after Clary told me to stop asking questions, I had several follow-ups. Rune Law was the last place I wanted to be. I exited the empty classroom into an equally empty hall and headed in the opposite of my next class. When I got to the library, the same work-study student was behind the desk, reading a book with a shirtless man on the cover. We ignored each other, and I headed to the row of ancient school computers at the back of the main floor. The internet didn't have a lot to teach me about magic, but I wasn't looking for a lesson. I was on the hunt for dirt. I logged into the public computer and pulled up a browser. I tried searching for Montgomery and teleport, no interesting results. How rich do you have to be to keep all records of your family's magic a secret? The articles that appeared in the search featured Montgomery gardens and estates and stories on how they built their business from nothing. One website listed all the prestigious things the next generation of Montgomerys were up to. Claire was featured as the youngest of the Montgomery cousins, but almost as an afterthought. She wasn't even in the picture, at the top of the page with the rest of her family. I opened a new tab for a new search. The way Claire's voice had shaken told me that there was something to find. Her fear confirmed it. By telling me to stay away, she pretty much guaranteed that I would continue looking into it. Besides, the Montgomery name was my only lead. Searching for Montgomery and accident, I found a whole side of the family. Funny how they buried any mention of teleportation, and not the rest of their dirty secrets. I scrolled to one site to read a news article on an arrest from 3 years ago. Chadwick Montgomery had been arrested in North Carolina for drug trafficking. The article did not detail his process or list his accomplices, but what it did say struck me. Montgomery had been suspected of using rare magic to help the gang avoid detection. The arresting officer said it was only a matter of time before he slipped up and got caught. Montgomery's misuse of magic resulted in the death of at least one man. Montgomery is now serving 30 years in a North Carolina prison for manslaughter, reckless endangerment, irresponsible use of magic, aiding and abetting, and drug trafficking. Chadwick Montgomery had been helping criminals get away from crime scenes without detection. The Montgomerys were known to have the ability to teleport. 3 years ago, An unnamed man died as a result of this criminal activity. The math added up. Chadwick Montgomery killed my father. I shook my head to myself, still staring at the screen. That was a stretch, of course. Montgomery could have killed anybody. The article didn't describe the victim or any surviving relatives. Besides, I was counting on my dad being alive when I found him. I flipped back to the first article, the one about the Montgomery children. Chadwick was pictured but not mentioned in the article. Now that I knew what he looked like, and relatively where to find him, I just needed an excuse to go visit. Feeling lighter than I had in years, I went to close the browser. Something stopped me though, and I opened another new tab instead. This time I searched for Camille Lenore. The first hit on the search page was a series of photos of Camille exactly the way I remembered her. She had the best smile, and sandy blonde hair that matched Jackson's. It was like stepping into the past. I could hear her laughing in my memory. Jackson was featured in several of them, as were his parents, but most were photos that people had posted after she died. Below the photos were several articles about her death and an obituary. I clicked on the obit first. Camille's smiling school photo topped the short column about her. The obituary described Camille as loving and special, with great magical potential. She'd been 11 when she died of an incurable disease, leaving behind her 9-year-old brother, Jackson, and their parents, Dale and Vanessa Lenore. Her service had been held at a funeral parlor in Maine, followed by interment at the family plot. She would lie forever with the people who loved her most. My parents had not let me go to the funeral. I never saw the Lenores again, and we moved on a few weeks later. I went back to the search results and clicked on the first article on the list. The author described witness reports that contradicted the family's statements about Camille. According to Dale Lenore's press release sent by his office and not written by the man himself, theorized the author his daughter had been wasting away for some time. The release promised that the full force of the Lenore Corporation would focus on cures for the incurable. There were 2 witnesses who came forth to tell a different story though. Both anonymous sources swore that Camille had been a lively young woman until one day she disappeared. The next time she was seen was in her casket. At the bottom of the article, someone had added an update. It stated that the Lenore Corporation had thus far developed 3 such vaccines, and had no intention of slowing development. The date was 13 months ago. Lively and exuberant, that's how I remembered Camille. When we played together, she would conjure new worlds for us to explore with her magic, places for us to go in our minds where anything was possible. She would create sprawling purple oceans, or vast deserts of glitter instead of sand, or rainbow castles. And when we opened our eyes, our bodies were as tired as if we had actually gone to any of those places to run and play. All the fun of exploration without having to leave home. I smiled sadly remembering Jackson's sister. I would have to find a way to make him see that I would never hurt her, and then I remembered that I didn't care what he thought because Jackson was a big fat jerk, and I hated him. Hating Jackson reminded me of Emily and how our last conversation had hurt her. There was somewhere else I needed to be. I wiped the search history before closing the browser, then headed for the door. Work-study girl stopped me on my way. Time travel kid, she said to get my attention. There was no point in correcting her. I detoured on my way to the door to stop at her desk. I found something that might help your search. Didn't see you yesterday, or I would have given it to you then. Had to hide it so the librarian wouldn't reshelve it. She reached into a drawer on the other side of the desk, pulling out a book. The thin hardcover book made a soft thud when she placed it on the desk to slide to me. Might be worth looking into. The cover was a simple green and black swirl, like the surface of a still potion with the gold letters floating on top. Everything we know about the parallel universe. Judging by the thickness of the volume, we didn't know very much. For a bored work-study student, this girl would make a decent librarian. I was surprised that she remembered me at all. Even more surprised that she had a theory about where my dad had gone. I thought you said you didn't work here, I told her with a smile, accepting the book. I didn't have the heart to tell her I was hot on another theory. She shrugged without returning my smile. I just didn't want to help you, my shift was almost over. That checked out. I thanked her for the book. She made me check it out, and as much as I didn't want to leave a paper trail, there were already too many people who knew what I was searching for that it no longer mattered. Third period wasn't quite finished when I got to the cafeteria. I decided to wait for the group at our usual table. The library book stayed in my bag, unopened, but I turned to the next blank page in my notebook to write down what I knew about Chadwick Montgomery. Students started spilling in after the tone set them free from class. Emily, having seen me waiting, came to the table before getting lunch. Before she got to the table, I was already up and apologizing. Emily, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. I should never have insinuated. Emily's curls bounced as she laughed. It's all good, Ro, you can calm down. Tell me you didn't skip rune law to write an apology. She gestured to the notebook clenched in my hand. In the face of her forgiveness, I didn't know what to say, so I threw my arms around her instead. Get a room, Orville called happily from the caf doors, loud enough to hear over the other students. Emily and I laughed, and I released her from my hug. Hungry? She asked. I nodded and followed her to the line at the hot bar. Once in line, Emily leaned close so I could hear her ask, "Do you want to prep for the Omega trial tonight?" No, I thought, but my mouth didn't listen. That sounds great. All the prep in the world wouldn't matter. I wasn't planning to be here in 6 days. 17. Secrets. In movies, there's something sacred and special about sleepovers. All the best bonding happens in the middle of the night, when the characters share their deepest secrets and go on crazy scavenger hunts to prove themselves to the popular girls. I'd never been to one before, so I couldn't speak to the accuracy of that trope. Which was why I was torn when Emily suggested a study session and sleepover. Much as I wanted to experience that rite of passage, I didn't need the temptation of secret spilling. But maybe real life wouldn't be so much like the movies. It's no big deal. My roommate has been staying with her girlfriend a few doors down, so I'm all by myself anyway. Emily looked up at me and must have seen the conflict on my face. She added quickly, "But no pressure if you don't want to." Oh boy, did I want to. I didn't have it in me to tell her no. Count me in, I told her, maybe too enthusiastically. I would never be able to convince myself that it was a good idea, but I might never get another opportunity. I'm not all that comfortable in my own room anyway. What with someone breaking in 2 nights in a row and all. I hadn't meant to admit that out loud though. Emily definitely heard the comment. Her eyes opened wide with worry. Why not? Are you in 201? It's not haunted, I swear. That's just a rumor to scare the new girls. I laughed. Not 201. I'm on the 1st floor. It just doesn't feel like home. I paused, looking for a more plausible explanation. Transferring here has been a weird transition, but I've been the new kid a lot. You'd think I would get used to it. Lies are better when they are made up of truths. That's what I'm here for, Ro. Emily beamed at me, bumping my shoulder with hers. I got your back. I smiled back, hoping that she couldn't tell how her words broke my heart. Plus, every Magischola around the country has an Omega Club society. Emily rolled her eyes, as she said the word. Club members usually end up in the upper echelon of society. The presidents of several major companies, founders and owners of many of the labs in the country, and POTUS. The president. How are you allowed to tell me all this? Omega seemed like much more than a club for Magischola students. Emily sat cross-legged on her unmade bed, and I had turned her standard-issue desk chair around to face her. One side of the room looked more or less pristine, while the other had been hit by some sort of teenage girl cyclone. I didn't know if Emily's roommate preferred her girlfriend's room or needed an escape from the mess. Could be both. That binding spell Ms. Williams put on us. It stops you from telling anybody about Omega until you're inducted. Because I'm already in the club, I have a different spell. If you don't make it into the club, they'll take all memory of this conversation from you. And from me, honestly. As if that made me feel any better. Emily hastily added, but don't worry about that, you're definitely getting in. I needed to change the subject. What was your test like? A smile lit her face and Emily leaned forward on her knees to tell the story. Because I'm a psionic, they wanted to pair me with a similar mage, but there weren't any other illusionists in our Omega. I'm the only one to ever make it into the BPM chapter. That's going to be important later. Now, the goal of the test is to prove that you are strong enough or cunning enough or creative enough, that you'll add something to the group. As an illusionist, I already knew I had magic that made me member material. Maria told me that the test was just a formality, that they just wanted to see what I could do. She paused to build suspense, and I waited, an enraptured audience. Emily wove an interesting tale, but what held me in her story were the things she didn't say, like how the Omega Society was collecting useful, powerful mags to put them in positions where Omega could influence politics, development, and who knew what else. They weren't really sure who to pair me with, and Ms. Williams wasn't here yet, or else I bet she would have done it herself, so they told me to just pick someone and make them see their worst fear. That's not really how illusionist magic works, but they didn't know better. Anyway, I happily picked someone. I picked everyone. And I made them all see different horrors. And I passed. A grin split her face in a mix of humor and pride. What did you make them see? Curiosity got the better of me. Emily shrugged and smiled a private smile. That's a secret. I guess that nobody in the club ever asked her to recreate the demonstration. If Omega boasted powerful members in positions of power, what plans did they have for Emily? So that means you major scale. It wasn't a question, just a clarification. I wasn't sure how to break the news that, on paper, I was a minor scale elemental. That truth bomb would be easier to drop than the whole truth about what I was. With any kind of luck, Emily would never have to find out all of the untruths I let her believe. Maybe Emily's major illusionist power and the fact that the society wanted to claim her magic would be enough to save her spot in Omega when I was gone. For Emily, there might be more danger in not knowing about a secret society that knew all about her. Was there no end to Omega's influence? Emily nodded. Her smile drooped some. When she spoke next, her tone was low, serious. Can I tell you a secret? I wish you wouldn't. Nothing to do, but let the classic sleepover bonding happen. I cocked my head to the side and waited, nodding my head in what I hoped was encouragement when she stayed silent. My parents. I mean. Emily swallowed audibly. I come from a long line of illusionists. My parents both came from powerful psionic families, and are both illusionists themselves. Sometimes I think they don't even like each other. I think they are only together because of me. That they only became a couple in the first place to combine their power. Waiting, I watched as Emily looked down at her hands in her lap. Shoulders slumped, voice barely a whisper, she finished her confession with. If you can't be the best illusionist of our time, I guess being the parent of the best illusionist is a decent consolation prize. Did the situation call for humor or hugs? There was no instruction book for what to do when a friend you've known for 4 days admits a terrible family secret. If this were a movie, I would have to share an equally horrific secret. Which one would I choose, being a dangerous fugitive null who escaped detection, or my suspicion that my mom only allowed me to come to BPM because she thought my dad's disappearance was my fault and therefore my problem to fix. Making a split decision, I leaned further forward on the back of my chair to tell Emily, "Do you know what it means to be the best at something?" I waited for Emily to look up at me. Thankfully, her eyes were dry. "It means that you don't have to play by their rules. Doesn't matter how you got to be the way you are." I sunk all of my conviction into the next part: you're the best, and they can't ever take that away from you. The Newsomes might have an illusionist breeding program planned, but Emily didn't have to follow in their footsteps. Her smile lit up the room, wiping away all of the despair about her secret. My parents weren't good enough for Omega. Their names weren't on the roster of any Magischola chapter. Then she shrugged, as if that simple motion was enough to make her forget the weight of the conversation, and scooted off the bed. "Anyway, it's time to prep for your trial, not focus on mine. Unless you're secretly also an illusionist, my experience won't help you a whole lot." Now standing, Emily paced the few feet between the dorm beds. "Do you think you can recreate that earthquake from Commendation your first day?" I couldn't tell her that the earthquake had been an accident, that I'd only been trying to distract Ms. Williams from poking my brain. Magic didn't always work the way I wanted it to, and rarely did it do the same thing twice. "Maybe." Emily grinned wickedly. "Have some conviction, Ro. I have an idea." 18 choices. Emily's idea was risky. Not nearly as risky as a null posing as a mage in a school full of young mags and a powerhouse of untapped magic in the basement. But close. Her plan would have been less risky if her partner in crime was anyone but me, because her plan involved sneaking into the arena after hours. It's foolproof. We just have to wait for Jackson to leave the arena so we can get in and practice. Like it was that easy. Nothing is that easy. How do you know that he'll be in there after hours? Emily rolled her eyes at me. We now stood on opposite sides of the room, and opposite sides of the conversation. Nepotism is real in the Lenore family. Ms. Williams will give her nephew whatever he wants, and she's not even shy about it. She thought about it for a minute and added, "Anyone will give Jackson whatever he wants. It pays to be sexy and rich and popular." I raised an eyebrow at her, hands on my hips. "Earlier today he was just pretty. Now you think he's sexy." "I told you that in confidence." Emily squeaked. A pink tinge crept over her cheeks. "Don't change the subject," she said, seeing through my dirty trick. All I needed was time to find the right argument. "He's there a couple nights a week. All we have to do is wait him out when he gets his aunt to unlock the door. Easy peasy." She paused for drama, her delight concerning. "And that's not even the best part. What could be better than stalking a boy and sneaking into an off-limits part of the school after hours to practice magic? Nobody will even see us because we'll be invisible." I did not like the triumph in her voice. "Couple questions." I knew my expression was doubtful as I studied her. Thankfully, my hesitation did not deter her excitement. I didn't want to deflate her bubble. I just had to poke a big enough hole in her plan to keep us away from the arena. It was getting harder to ignore the magic in the air where the wards couldn't stop it. Going down there every day made it worse. The mental seal on my magic was going to break one day, and it would be a disaster for anyone near me. Moving up my timeline had been a blessing in disguise. 30 days may have been too many, and I might have ended up hurting a lot of people who didn't deserve it if I'd stayed that long. I was pretty sure I could handle 6 more days. I held up one finger. 1. How do you plan to make us invisible? The limits of illusionist magic aside, the wards on the school block all magic. At least it blocked most magic. I still wasn't sure how Ms. Williams had cast the binding spell on us. I held up another finger. 2. what happens if Jackson doesn't go to the arena at all between now and Tuesday? And, a third finger, 3, what happens if we get caught? Mirroring my raised fingers, Emily answered my questions in order. Orville can make us invisible. We can't tell him exactly what we are doing thanks to the binding spell, and he'll have to physically be with us in the arena, but Orville is always down for hijinks. She put one of her fingers down so that only 2 remained. Jackson goes to the arena all the time, so that's not going to be an issue. 1 finger left. We won't get caught. Overconfidence does not make one stealthy, in fact, it more often does the opposite. But say, just for a second, that we do get caught, I countered. Emily's pumped both eyebrows at me suggestively. Then we say that you have a huge crush on Jackson, and wanted to get some alone time with him. She wiggled her shoulders when she said alone time with him. I furrowed my brow, but otherwise ignored her comment. All of this for a little practice seems like a lot. Serious again, but not cruelly, she said, do you want to pass the test? Believe it or not, I did. I shouldn't, but I did. What a weird feeling, wanting something you know you could have but that you don't deserve. If I let loose the power I held, I could bring the Omega members to their knees. Literally. I might even get lucky enough not to kill anyone. But as soon as they discovered what I was, it would all be over, my mission, my freedom, probably even my life. I nodded solemnly, unsure if I could trust myself to not tell her everything if I opened my mouth. Then let's make sure you are as prepared as you can possibly be for this test. She closed the space between us and took my hand, squeezing it with hers encouragingly. Her faith in me was as revitalizing as it was debilitating. My resolve threatened to shatter. Sneaking into the arena is the best way to prepare. If we get caught, you won't be alone. I squeezed her hand, which was warm where mine was suddenly clammy with anxiety over the plan. Fighting back tears, my throat closed up and kept me from speaking. Small favors. If only Emily had left it there. You're special, Ro, she insisted with a smile. I was instantly thrown into a memory. I was 8 years old again, running with Cammy and Jackson in the woods behind their summer estate. We laughed together. Jackson's telekinetic power allowed him to slow my legs until I was barely walking. As revenge, Cammy forced him to close his eyes with her own magic, and he tripped over a rock. We weren't supposed to be using magic. As long as I kept a seal on my nullness, it was relatively safe to be around other kids, but only if they weren't magical. I knew my mom was going to be upset when she found out. But I just wanted to play. So when Jackson was distracted, I sped past him where he knelt on the dirt trail with all the strength I had in my little legs. I tagged him on the shoulder, laughing victoriously as I zoomed by, happy to no longer be it. You're special, Cammy. I wish I was as strong as you. Back in Emily's room, I looked into her concerned eyes and shook the past from my mind. There would be a time and place for remembering Cammy, but it wasn't there. I excused myself to the restroom. It was a shared space, but most of the other girls on the floor had either already brushed their teeth or wouldn't be getting ready for bed for hours yet. Tossing water at my face, heedless of the mess I was making of the sink and my shirt, I breathed deeply to calm myself. Maybe there was a reason I didn't have any friends. Maybe I was too dangerous to be part of someone else's life. Maybe I needed to leave now, try again at another Magiscola. Or give up entirely. I had to make a choice. Stay, and risk everything to ultimately end up hurting Emily when I disappeared the way my dad's disappearance still haunted me, or leave, now, before I lost my nerve. My reflection in the grimy unframed mirror told the story of a sad, lonely girl who had secrets and ambitions. That girl wanted so badly to be loved and accepted. All I wanted was to find my dad. There was nothing else for me after that mission. I couldn't think that far ahead. Every day was a fight to survive. I was tired of running. And the girl in the mirror was stronger than I was. She practiced her smile on me and together we left the restroom, heading back the way we came. 19. Thrilling read. Sensing that I needed time, Emily did not bring up the plan again before we went to bed. Or maybe she had second thoughts about sponsoring me, a person she'd only known a few days, for her secret society. It couldn't be that she regretted asking me to stay in her room. She would have asked me to leave already. At least I hoped that wasn't it. My weirdness didn't stop her from being friendly and kind, but there were no more secrets shared. I was grateful for it, even though I knew I had made her uncomfortable. I curled up in her roommate's unfamiliar bed, surrounded by the smell of the other girl's fruity shampoo, and slept soundly for the first time all week. It didn't bother me to sleep in someone else's bed. This room felt safer than mine ever had. Overall, not a bad first sleepover. If it was the only sleepover I would ever have, I would count it a success. As an added bonus, I learned an important fact about my new friend. Emily was not a morning person. She grumped when her alarm went off and rolled over, snoozing it on autopilot. I dressed and remade the bed in the dim light peeking around the solid blinds. When I came back into the room after brushing my teeth, Emily had sat up amid her crumpled covers. Morning. I pulled my hair away from my face and studied my reflection in the limited light. As good as it's going to get. Emily grunted, which was so different from the person I had come to know that I laughed. That earned me a dark look from my friend. Perky Emily would be back later to forgive me for laughing. I crossed the room to lift the blinds on the single window a few inches to let in enough light for me to gather my stuff. When the rectangle of light hit Emily's bed, she hissed at me and scooted away from the light with cranky, slitted eyes. That time I kept my laughter to myself. "I'll save you a seat at breakfast, Dracula," I said on my way to the door. "Don't joke," Emily's voice rumbled with the dregs of sleep, "he was a mean bastard." Pausing at the door to consider the implication that Dracula may have existed outside the pages of Bram Stoker's novel, I waved back to Emily and headed to the cafeteria. Maria and Orville beat me to the table. They were deep in conversation about a rune law assignment when I arrived, stopping only to say hello between arguments. Joseph arrived just after I sat across from Maria, his plate heaped with pancakes and bacon. Orville looked desperately across the table to his roommate. "Tell me you didn't do the paper for rune law, Joseph. I can't be the only one who didn't realize it was due today." "Didn't do it," Joseph answered between bites. "But I was busy last night. I also didn't realize it was due today." Orville hung his head, but it was Maria that jumped on the bait. "What did you get up to last night?" Students filtered into the caf in twos and threes, most still asleep or grumpier than Emily. Maria waited patiently for Joseph's response, but Orville was not in a patient mood. "Where were you, man? Pretty sure your bed wasn't slept in." "Hard to tell since you never make it, but still." Holding up one finger to buy himself time to chew, Joseph swallowed another bite of pancake. "I was with Harmony. Harmony Gold." Maria didn't ask for verification, she simply stated the other girl's name. Thanks to that magic muffin, I worked up the courage to tell her how I felt. He smiled triumphantly, unable to contain himself. Poor Archie never stood a chance. Joseph happily mutilated another pancake with his fork. The thick scent of syrup wafted over the table. "A muffin did all that, huh?" I asked with a smile, and popped a bite of pancake into my mouth. He nodded seriously. "A magic muffin. I gotta go." Maria stood abruptly and left the table with all her stuff. Joseph looked after her, confused. "What's with her?" Orville just shook his head. Knowing that, even indirectly, I had a hand in Maria's current turmoil made me cringe. My own pancakes suddenly tasted chalky and thick on my tongue. I was used to feeling like an outsider, but the sudden transition from in the loop to outside it was jarring. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, I swallowed the inedible pancake in my mouth and looked for Emily. While I didn't find her, I found someone else. And he apparently had been looking for me. Jackson's angry gaze met mine as he stalked toward our table. I've been looking all over for you. What happened last night? He demanded in a low, serious voice that made Joseph choke on his breakfast. Other students started to notice the most popular guy in school standing over the new kid. I stood slowly, as calmly as I could given the emotions warring inside of me. Anxiety was a powerful inhibitor, rivaled by guilt over Maria's broken heart. Neither was as powerful as my main motivator, fear of discovery. Emily should coin the phrase Jackson magnet. The whole of Beatrice Potts was about to be using it. Every eye watched our table. Even though the cafe was less than half full, I doubted that it'd take long for word to spread. Miley was probably already contemplating ways to kill me without getting caught. Let's take this somewhere else, I suggested. I shouldered my bag, gathered my tray and Maria's, to clear the table, and walked to the exit without looking back. Jackson would follow if he wanted to keep berating me. It didn't take Jackson long to meet me in the hall, but he didn't stop when he caught up to me. He stomped further down the hall without a word until he found an empty classroom, and, using my own tactic against me, didn't bother to look back to see if I would follow. We both knew I would. Not 3 minutes since I stopped him from telling everyone in the cafeteria that he was secretly helping me complete my mission. Jackson had run out of words. When I entered the empty room of his choice, he closed the door behind me, but continued his pretense of stoicism. I let the proverbial moments tick by. He was going to break before I did. I should have known it was that attitude that ensured that I would be the one to break the silence. Is there something I can do for you? It wasn't a haughty question, just an inquiry. A much more polite way to ask the question I wanted an answer to. Jackson just rolled his eyes in exasperation. After all this time, it was hard to imagine that he had once been that boy in the woods. I thought you were on a mission. A mission that I was helping you complete, so you can get on with your life, and I can get on with mine. Imagine my surprise when you stood me up in the library last night. He sighed, irritated and impatient, and handed me a book I hadn't noticed him carrying. I think you should look into this as an option. The thick leather-bound tome was a mix of browns and red with ornate gold writing across the front and the spine. The reality of other realities. A study of parallel universes, and what they can do for America. Thrilling read. I'm not doing all the work for you, Rochelle, Jackson warned. He crossed his arms and gave me a serious look. I'd never expected him to do the work for me. I hadn't even asked him to meet me in the library a second time because I already found what I was looking for. Chadwick Montgomery. A realization hit me. Now that I had a lead, there shouldn't be anything holding me back. I should have left as soon as I found his name. Now that I knew that fact, it was time to go. I would pick Mom up on my way to North Carolina, and we would find a way to Montgomery together. And then we would find my dad. Don't think about Emily. Don't think about Omega. Just go. A thank you would be appropriate. I barked a laugh. You're just mad because you think I ditched you last night. People like me don't get stood up. The condescension in his tone almost made me lose my breakfast. That's rich. Hasn't anyone ever told you no? I demanded, ignoring the book he still held between us. If he wanted me gone so badly, he would be happy to know I wasn't going to stick around. As a matter of fact, they haven't, he said with an ominous smile. He slowly laid the Parallel Universe guide on the nearest desk. I should have known I was in trouble by the look on his face. I should have run. Fear held my feet to the floor as he advanced with calculating steps. The last decade has been just peachy. I'm the hope of the Lenore family now, as the only remaining heir, in case you didn't know. My family's future rests on my shoulders. Their expectations are high and the consequences severe if I don't live to the memory of my dead sister. But in general, no, they deny me nothing. Dark sarcasm dripped from his words. Jackson closed the space between us. My life is great. I do not want for anything. Everyone who's anyone wants to be my friend. It doesn't matter how I treat them, or how boring and basic I make myself. To them, I can do no wrong. I watched Jackson close his eyes for a moment, the anger that threatened to take over him barely contained. But when he opened them, I could see the pain under all that rage. His eyes darkened again quickly, hiding his anguish. He was close enough to touch. My hands clenched into fists at my side to keep me from reaching out to comfort him the way he had comforted me. I wasn't sure a hug would solve Jackson's problem. There was one thing I could do to ease his pain, though. I'm sorry, Jackson. I should have told you that I found a lead yesterday. I maintained eye contact with him to prove that he wasn't going to scare me off. He hadn't intimidated me into leaving my first day, and the angry, unreasonable version of him wasn't going to do the trick either. I've read through everything that the library has to offer on teleportation, and I know where I need to go next. Jackson studied my face. How did we get from threats earlier in the week to this? There was something about the way he looked at me. He didn't just look at my lips, I imagined that. I swallowed, suddenly, irrationally afraid that Jackson was going to kiss me. Well, I had the cure for that fear, word vomit. You don't have to be afraid of me anymore. I have a few things to wrap up. I took a step back, putting space between us. Then I'll head south to find Chadwick Montgomery, and make him tell me what happened to my dad. I won't come back, and I won't go near your family. Everyone will be safe. At least that was a promise I could keep. Jackson stepped forward, closing the gap again. You can't do that, he said. Claire said. I cut him off. To hell with what Claire said. You don't understand. Shaking his head, Jackson didn't let me finish. It's a dead end. You're not going to find the answers you're looking for there. A shock charged through my pinky finger when Jackson's hand reached for mine. Again, my feet seemed frozen to the floor, but not in fear this time. Not with magic, either. Anticipation held me still. I think you should stay and keep looking, he whispered. His breath tickled my flushed cheek. I stared up into his magnetic blue eyes, twin pools I could lose myself in. What a difference a few days made. I couldn't ask him about his hot and cold routine. I didn't want to know the answer. I have to go. You wanted me to go, I reminded him. That was a long time ago, he said with a small smile. We were so close I could smell his toothpaste. I hoped he didn't mind the scent of syrup breath. 3 days, I breathed. 3 days ago, he had threatened me to get me to leave. Now he was asking me to stay. Stay, he repeated. My heart fluttered in my chest. Where I can protect you. That snapped me out of whatever spell held me in place. I slipped my hand out of his and frowned. I don't need you to protect me. I didn't need anyone's protection. Being a powerhouse, even a defective one, meant I would have little trouble defending myself against anyone who wanted to harm me. I'd never been in a life-threatening fight, but I imagined I would walk away just fine. Still. Stay anyway so that I can try, Jackson said, smiling with one side of his mouth. The crooked smile hit his eyes that no longer swirled in demonstration of his pain. I crossed my arms, a barrier between us that he couldn't cross. Protect me from me. Well, yes. Jackson frowned, confused by my change in attitude. Obviously, the Magiscola is good for you. The wards render all magic, especially your brand of magic, completely harmless. This is the best place for you. I could hear that he believed every word he was saying. That makes it sound like a prison, I spat. Jackson looked like he would say more but decided against it. Speaking of prison. He turned back toward the front of the room and walked to the book he'd brought me. I think this is the direction you should be looking for your father. I had to borrow it from my aunt's personal collection. He handed me the book a second time. I kept my arms crossed. Why can't you just trust me that I know I'm doing? Because there's one thing you didn't consider. Jackson stopped trying to hand me the book, but kept it in hand. What could you possibly think you know about my dad's disappearance that I don't? The conversation was getting old. A small part of me wanted to go back to the moment we might have almost kissed. I've seen how powerful you can be. And you could have done it with enough magic and enough motivation. It would have been an accident, Rochelle, I know that. But you could have done it. Done what? By now I was yelling. Created a prison reality. He shook the book at me. And sent your dad to it. I definitely didn't want to kiss him anymore. Rochelle and her friends have experienced countless laughter and tears together. If you are also touched by this sincere friendship, subscribe to our channel and witness with us how their friendship blossoms in the magical world.